Good evening, everyone. I know a few folks are still getting settled, but we are going to get started here. Great to see you tonight. My name is Megan Radecki. It's my pleasure to serve as your director here at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. We want to give a warm welcome to our Hauenstein Center members, our Cook Leadership Academy fellows. We have Grand Valley students here tonight, guests from the community, and certainly all of those folks who are watching online as well. Thank you for being here for this really great talk. Once upon a time, I myself had thoughts that I would run for office. I've lived in the city of Grand Rapids, and I thought, oh, well, I'm going to be a second ward commissioner, and then I'm going to be mayor, just like our former mayor, Rosalind Bliss, and that's what I thought I was going to do. Fast forward a few years and a couple kids, and now I'm going to be honest, I don't really think that anymore. But certainly, we need more people to be thinking about running for office. A lot of the conversations I have go something like this. Oh, you'd have to be crazy to do that. But also, I really want to have good, smart, principled leaders representing me. Well, folks, I'm here to say that if we want that, that probably means that some of us need to start running. So, glad that you are all here tonight to hear from our featured speaker some of the research she has done about what happens specifically when women run for office and what that means for young people and also for community in general. So thank you all for joining us. The format for this evening is going to be slightly different than what we do, so I just want to give you a preview. We are going to have our leadership minute, then we're going to have a mini keynote from our featured guests, and then we are actually going to have a couple of our Cook Leadership Academy students and myself join us all, and we're going to have a little bit of a panel. So as Dr. Walbrecht tells us about her research, we're then going to find out whether or not that's true and test it against some of our students here. So you will notice a little break in the action about 2/3 of the way through, but I trust that all will go smoothly and it will really add to our program tonight. Of course, after that, we will have Q&A, so get your questions ready, write them down, because we'll be happy to hear about that. So at this time, as we do get started, it's my pleasure to introduce one of our Cook Leadership Academy fellows to share her leadership minute with us tonight. Jenna Wright is a junior at GVSU majoring in criminal justice with a minor in psychology. She serves as the advocacy chair on Student Senate, where she's passionate about amplifying student voices and fostering positive change on campus. Jenna aspires to become a lawyer and eventually establish her own firm. She also has a long-term interest in pursuing a career in politics. Jenna is committed to making a meaningful impact in her community through her academic and leadership endeavors. Outside of her studies, she enjoys staying active by going to the gym and spending time with friends and family. She's very appreciative of the connections she's made with peers in the CLA who share her drive for leadership and service. Would you all join me in welcoming Jenna?
Thank you, Megan, for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Wright, and I am a current junior here at Grand Valley with a major in criminal justice and a minor in psychology. I plan on pursuing a career in corporate law, and I also hope to pursue a career in public service. I am truly proud to be standing in front of you all today, not only as a student leader on this campus, but as someone who dreams big for my future. I am someone who believes deeply in growth, in service, and in the power of leadership to create change. For me, leadership has always been about more than titles or positions. It is about purpose. It is about showing up, using your voice, and taking every opportunity to make an impact. On campus, I currently serve as the advocacy chair on Student Senate for the second consecutive year. I'm a part of the DEI Student Engagement Cohort, where I have had the opportunity to work closely with the Inclusion and Equity Division here at Grand Valley. I am also a proud fellow of the Cook Leadership Academy program. Through these experiences, I've been able to work closely with others who are committed to building a more inclusive and supportive campus community. I am especially proud to stand in front of you all today as a woman of color. That identity has shaped so much of my leadership journey and the perspective I bring into the spaces I enter. One of the most important leadership lessons I have learned is the importance of women's empowerment in creating space for others. When I first stepped into some of my leadership roles, I was often the only woman of color in the room. At times, that could feel intimidating. But instead of allowing that to discourage me, I saw it as an opportunity. I quickly realized that representation matters. It always has, and it always will. Sometimes simply being present in those spaces opens the doors for others to see that they belong there too. Leadership, especially as a woman, requires confidence. It requires being bold, standing tall, and using your voice, even when you are the only one who looks like you in the room, or even when you are surrounded by people who may doubt you. True leadership is about creating respect through your actions, your work ethic, and your willingness to take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. But empowerment is not just about personal success. It is about lifting others up along the way, creating space, and building community. And it is about making sure the next woman who walks into that room feels welcomed, supported, and confident enough to take up space. So my leadership lesson is this: never underestimate the power of showing up as your authentic self. When you lead with confidence, courage, and commitment to inclusion, you don't just change your own path, you create space for others to rise with you. Because when one woman rises, we create space for many more to follow. My name is Jenna Wright, and I am a leader. Thank you. It is now my privilege to proudly introduce to you our featured speaker for the evening, Dr. Christina Woolbrick. Christina Woolbrick teaches and writes about American politics, political parties, gender in politics, and American political development. She currently serves as a professor of political science and director of the Washington program at Notre Dame. Christina is an accomplished political scientist, having garnered several awards for her previous books on the effects of women's suffrage. For more details about her publications, please refer to the full bio in your program. Christina was with us last year for a panel on the future of political parties. We were so intrigued when we learned about her latest book, See Jane Run, that we had to bring her back to discuss it in detail. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christina Woolbrick.
Good evening. It is such a pleasure to be back on this campus. As I've been saying to everyone today, because it's true, we often get more invitations than we can say yes to, but I had such a great experience. You have such a great staff here. Your facilities are beautiful. The crowd was so interesting. Then when I got the call again, I said, yes, absolutely. I would love to make the drive back on up to Grand Rapids. I like it better in the summer when I can then keep on going to Sleeping Bear or, X, Y, and Z. Unfortunately, I'm going back to Indiana tonight. But thank you all for coming out and for inviting me to be part of this really great community. So I'm going to talk today about some research that I and my colleague Dave Campbell at the University of Notre Dame have actually been undertaking for more than 2 decades now. I will say we've been doing other things at the same time, but we've had this long experience of trying to look into what impact do women have when they run for office. Excuse me. We know that women have lots of impact once they're in office. We know about how they legislate, their constituent service, etc. But we really wanted to look at what is the impact of women in politics on sort of how people understand politics and how they engage with it themselves. This idea doesn't come just from dusty old political science books, but it's something that we hear articulated by women politicians themselves all the time. So this, for example, is Kamala Harris giving her acceptance speech at the 2024 Democratic National Convention. In front are 2 girls in pigtails. Those are her nieces. And Harris writes, "I want every little girl across our country to know this. You can do anything, even if it has never been done before." Vice President Harris basically summed up the book right there, right? That by running for office, that women politicians show to little girls who are trying to learn about the world, including the political world, that politics is something that girls can do. Vice President Harris is not the only person to have said this. This is Hillary Clinton the night that she cinched the Democratic nomination in 2016. To every little girl who dreams big, yes, you can be anything you want, even president. Tonight is for you. Here's Elizabeth Warren running in 2020. And whenever I meet a little girl, I tell them I'm running for president because that's what girls do. Then we pinky promise that they'll remember. I want every girl, sorry, I thought I was gonna make it through, but I'm not. I want every girl to know that when they fight from the heart, they can win. Not just Democrats. This is Nikki Haley, who I think it's important to say, on the Republican side in 2024 was the last candidate standing in the battle with President Trump. Strong girls become strong women become strong leaders, right? This, what we in the book call the folk theory of role models, that women can, by running for office, can show other women, girls in particular, what is possible in politics. So, as much as I want to just take these politicians' words for it, one of the things we want to do in this project is sort of give some intellectual heft and some ideas. Why would we expect that when a woman runs for office, it might have some impact on both boys and girls in politics? And we really drew from two important traditions. And one of, this is why you should look at your slides, which I did. All right, so I'm going to tell you the spoiler, and then we're going to come back to the traditions. We were really interested in this book in lots of different kinds of effects, okay? So, does the presence of women politicians influence, we wanted to know, beliefs about women's capacity for leadership? When young people see women run, are they more likely to think, I think women can be good leaders. I think women belong in politics. I think that women can make a positive impact in politics. Does it change beliefs about the political system? So when we look out at a body that's making decisions for us, maybe it's our city council, maybe it's the United States House, and we think, can these people make good decisions that represent all of us? We know from earlier studies that more diverse bodies are usually recognized as being more legitimate, as making better decisions, etc. So when more women run, we wondered, does this change people's evaluation of really how well democracy is working? How well democracy works to really represent the people? And then finally, we're interested in sort of where those politicians started. What influence do these women have in terms of political ambition? Are young people who see women run, are they more likely to imagine voting as adults, imagine writing their member of Congress, imagine attending a protest, imagine running for office themselves, which is what we call ambition, right? Do these women inspire action among those who get to see them running for office? All right, now we're to the part where I said was theoretical foundations. So I'm first going to talk a little bit, real briefly, about democratic theory, okay? Now, this is like my most boring professorial moment, so it won't last much, right? In democratic theory, we have this long idea about descriptive representation. The idea that when we think about the people who are making decisions for us, one thing we might want is for them to share characteristics with us. That maybe farmers can better understand the challenges that farmers face. Maybe educators can help us do a better job of speaking for students and teachers, right? This is a kind of common part of our thinking about who should be representatives. And among those, we might think about women, right? As bringing a perspective grounded in their own experiences as women having something to say. And so what we get out of democratic theory is very much this idea that citizens are going to view the political system as more free and fair and good if it represents the different sort of people that are in the community. And I'm just going to throw up a couple of quotes. I'm not going to read them all. Students, this is your reminder, never read your PowerPoint slides. But just to give you an example of how democratic theorists have thought about this, What they've said is it's especially important to have representation of traditionally underrepresented groups. That if you look at politics and all you see is billionaires, not farmers, not workers, not whoever it is, you might assume that this isn't a place for other voices to be heard. It's only a place for certain people to be heard. And so having more women, people of color, whatever that might be in office, makes us feel that this is sort of more legitimate, right? So more women in office, Shapiro predicted way back in 1981, where there were maybe 14 women in the entire US House, will increase the acceptability of women in government. As we see them more, we'll believe that they're able to do it. Jane Mansbridge, recently retired from Harvard, also has written extensively on descriptive representation. She says, she uses this phrase, a social meaning of ability to rule. What she means is, if we look out in the world and only one type of person makes decisions and leads us in politics, we might come to see that person as the only sort of person who's capable. Though that's the kind of person that rules. Right? And that by expanding our leadership, we expand our understanding of who has that ability. We also draw from psychology and what's known as social role theory. This is basically the idea that as we grow up, we look to the world to understand what is possible and how to behave, right? Our parents are our first role models, then our community, we might grow up in a church or a particular neighborhood, and we see this is the way that people like us behave. We open doors for people that come in behind us. We say please and thank you, right? Whatever that might be. When any kind of role, maybe nurse or doctor or college professor, whatever it is overwhelmingly populated by one kind of person, we, especially as children, when we're coming to understand the world, see that that must be associated with that role. If all the women are nurses, not only do I think nursing is for women, but I think care is for women, and taking care of people is a woman's kind of job. So just to get an example of the representation of women I had when I was an adolescent, this is one of Ronald Reagan's cabinets in the 1980s. You might not be able to see her, but right in the middle with the blue shirt is Jean Kirkpatrick, I believe the only woman in that Reagan cabinet. This is when my daughters were adolescents. This is Joe Biden with his cabinet. By then, the women had learned to dress brightly to really stand out more than Kirkpatrick did. I have a friend who, with some other colleagues, did a fascinating study where they went in and they asked children, very young, a little older, to draw a political leader. This was actually pioneered in studies with people where children were asked to draw a scientist, looking at the same sort of thing. When children are very young, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, boys draw boys as leaders, girls draw girls as leaders. As they get older, girls increasingly draw boys because they've started to learn about the world. They've started to see the front page of newspapers or what's on television. You were a saint. And have updated their understanding. Oh, this must be something that boys do. Do not try to read that graph. It's there to make a point. So those are nice theories, but who's actually looked at this empirically? One of the things we do in the book is say a lot of people have tried to study this in a lot of different ways. This is one of, I think, 3 or 4 pages in our book of all the studies that have been done. Down at the bottom it says continued, because this table goes on and on, that have tried to look at the impact of women in all these different ways. And I'm just going to summarize it for you. The findings are kind of mixed. Sometimes it seems to matter and sometimes it doesn't. When they do find effects, they seem really small. They don't seem to make a really big difference. And in many cases, there are no effects at all. And so one conclusion might be that despite what Kamala Harris or Nikki Haley says, they're really not having that big of an effect on the way in which people think about politics, their activity, etc. So what we wanted to do in our research is to think about this a little more carefully and say, where should we be most likely to see the impact of role models where with these women who are in politics and are having this impact on the population? So one of the big innovations in our research is that we do focus on young people. We know from decades of research that adolescence is what's sometimes referred to as the impressionable years. As we come out into the world, become adults, we're learning about the world and our own place in it, and our views and values are really changing. Another way to say that is if an old woman like me sees one more woman run for political office, at this point in my life, you're probably not going to change me a lot one way or the other, right? But a younger person learning about the political world, I told the story at lunch today about my own father coming back in 1984 and telling me about Geraldine Ferraro. I was still developing my ideas. I was 14 years old and trying to understand the way that the world worked. And so we think we're more likely to see effects among young people. I'm not going to go too detailed in most of these. We look at candidates rather than office holders. Candidates are out there trying to get your vote, and so in many ways we might see them more and be more exposed to them than, say, office hours. You can tell I'm a college professor, office hours. Office holders. We're going to only look at candidates who are very visible, and the way that we do that is we look at people running for the big offices. So with all due respect to anybody here in a state legislature or a city council, don't usually get as much sort of attention, so we look at governors, senators, those sorts of things. We're going to look at candidates that are viable. What do I mean by that? Traditionally, parties have been most excited about nominating women for elections in which they're sure to lose. And so if you never gain more than 30% of the vote in your district, it's unlikely you're getting enough coverage or being seen enough that you're really sort of having an impact. So we're going to look at women candidates who either won or came quite close to winning. And then finally, we have found in our research this sort of irony. The more that people say, oh my gosh, she is the first woman to ever run for mayor of this town, to ever run for Senate from this state, to ever run from House in this area, this actually draws attention to the fact that they're breaking barriers, right? And you might think, people see that attention and think, oh, politics, I'm reminded, if this is the first woman mayor ever, I'm reminded that women being in politics is still unusual. We actually found the opposite, that people look at path-breaking politicians and they think, oh, I can do that too. This is a place where women and girls belong. Okay, now I'm going to show you a lot of figures, but I promise I'm going to walk through them. And the title at the top is always going to tell you what the conclusion is, so you don't even have to look at it at all if you don't. I am not capable of talking about research without a figure behind me, so this is really just to help me. All right, so first I want to tell you about this study we did. It turns out it's very hard to interview young people. I was telling the story at lunch. It used to be you could walk into a grade school and say, I'd like to talk to your fourth graders. And they'd say, sure, random man off the street, come talk to our fourth graders. You can't do that anymore. You have to get parental consent. You have to do these sorts of things. And so we were really excited about this study we did around the 2020 election of about 1,000 teenagers. And what I'm going to draw your attention to is the fact that we talked to these teenagers twice. We talked to them in October before the election, and then we talked to them again in spring after the election. And this way we can kind of get measures of how they were thinking about the world and their own activity and beliefs before and after the election, right? And so that is also, doing those sorts of surveys is also very hard. Imagine getting your kid to do something once, like fill out a survey. Now you want them to do it again, right? This is not always easy, but we managed to get that done in 2020. So then we asked these teenagers, if we had more women in elected office, would America be worse or better? And we asked them, in general, do you think women or men are better at things like working out compromise, being honest and ethical, being a strong leader, working well under pressure? And we chose these on purpose. The first two are sort of traditionally thought of things that women are better at, and the second two are things that men are traditionally viewed as being better at. So what did we find? I want to first show you where we started, where our young people were when we first asked them this question in October. It's really hard for me not to walk over there, so I'm going to talk really loud for a second. All right, what is happening here? Republican boys asked them, would we be better off with more women? What about those feminine traits? Do you think women are better at, or men are better at those? What about those masculine traits? And then we actually asked them some basic standard questions about sexism. So not even politics, just thinking about sexism in general, right? And what you're gonna find is that we have two outliers, right? Democratic girls, always the more positive about women as leaders, always the least sexist. And then we have Republican boys who are always sort of the lowest on women better, feminine traits, et cetera, et cetera. You might say, how can you even talk about 15-year-olds having a party identification? I'm happy to answer that question in our Q&A, but basically I could put like a metric ton of research in front of you. One of the things we learn as we're growing up is we, my family, we are Catholic, we are Michiganders, we are Republicans, right? This is part of our sort of socialization. People like me fall into these categories. Okay, so that's where we start. Democratic girls really high, Republican boys comparatively lower. Yet more me yelling in front of slides. All right, what's happening? Republican girls and boys become more positive about women leaders. So here's our Republican boys. We asked them, do you think women do a good job? They're just as good at leadership as men are. And here's Republican boys who live somewhere where there are no women running for political office. No women running for House, Senate, or governor. Thank you so much. I'm such a difficult person, right? Is it working? No? There we go. Yes? Yes. All right. These are boys that live somewhere where there's one woman, and these are boys that live somewhere where there were two women running for governor, House, or Senate. Same for Republican girls, Democratic boys, and Democratic girls. And what you can see is for our Republicans, as they were exposed to more women candidates, they become more positive about women's ability to be effective in politics and to be good leaders. This is our masculine traits, and here we see that Republican girls in particular, the more women they're exposed to, the more positive they are about women's ability to be strong leaders, make strong decisions, etc. In comparison, Democratic boys and Democratic girls aren't doing nothing. They don't really move much at all. We even find that women political leaders make a difference in general, like what kind of opinions you articulate in terms of basically measures of sexism, right? And so the more that Republican girls are exposed to women candidates, the less sexist they become. That's what that graph is showing. So why Republicans? Why are Democrats not moved by women politicians? Aren't they supposed to be the party of women and all this sort of thing? What we think is happening is that Republicans actually have more room to move. What do I mean by that? I mean, Democratic girls could increase on all of these, but not dramatically, right? But what we see is as Republican girls are exposed, this is the graph I showed you before, so Republican boys, Republican girls, Democratic boys, Democratic girls, right? As Republican girls are more exposed to women politicians, they actually increase on all of these and start to look more like Democratic girls. The same for Republican boys. The more that they're exposed to women candidates, the more they reach the level of of Democratic boys, right? And so the idea is by putting forward these other images of the capacity of women, we're going to see these sorts of effects. Other one. There we go. How about beliefs about democracy? These figures are going to look pretty similar. We ask people, is it important to live in a democracy? Is democracy the best form of government? We ask this question because there are some surveys suggesting that younger people are less enthusiastic about democracy as a whole. We're going to put both those questions into one index. Here we're going to see that it's actually girls. It's not Republicans. Republican girls, the more they're exposed to women candidates, so that's the pace over time, the more supportive of democracy they become. We actually find a significant effect for Democratic girls as well. That's going to be on the far right of that figure. It doesn't look significant, but it is slightly significant. So one of the things we're finding is that where you see effects depends on what kind of effects you're talking about. So when it came to beliefs about women leaders, we mostly see the effects among Republican girls and boys. When it comes to beliefs about democracy itself, it's girls who look out and say, oh, this looks like a good system. There are girls, people like me, there are women, people like me, participating in it, right? So they're more likely to be inspired. Almost there. I just said this. We're going to skip that. All right. Let's finally talk about actual action, right? So the two things I've talked about so far, beliefs about women as leaders and beliefs about democracy, are just that. They're attitudes and beliefs. And now we want to know, is this actually going to turn into action? Is there any sort of relationship to action? And so we're going to look at that a couple of ways. We're going to ask these teenagers, when you grow up, are you going to vote? Pretty straightforward question. We're also going to ask them a bunch of political activism questions. When you grow up, are you going to, right, participate in a protest, work on a campaign, give money to a candidate, write to an elected official, right? All these sorts of ways of expressing political preferences in the political world. And finally, we're going to ask them, when you grow up, do you think that you're going to run for office? And we're going to look at all three of these sort of separately. Voter turnout is by far the modal way, the most common way in which citizens participate in government. Even then, we get maybe 60% in a presidential election. All these other things are extremely rare, the truth be told. And you might be thinking, I know lots of people who have done those things. And that is because you are strange people who come out on a Thursday night to listen to a talk about politics. You are not normal. Of course you do those things, right? And so in the population more generally, these are much less, we're much less likely to see these activities. All right, here's what we find. When it comes to turnout, when Republican boys are exposed to more women politicians running for these offices, they become more likely to say they plan to turn out to vote, they plan to turn out to vote as adults. The same is true of Democratic girls. They also become more likely to say that they're going to turn out to vote. I won't go into it. We don't actually find any findings for political engagement in general. But we do find very similar patterns for whether or not you think, when I grow up, which is where, of course, Megan started us, I think I'm going to run for political office, right? Who's going to actually put themselves out there? Again, we see a pretty significant and statistically significant impact for Republican boys and for Democratic girls. Now, you might be thinking, I've gone over 3 different outcomes. In one, what the two groups that were affected shared is that they're Republicans. And then the second time, there were 2 affected groups, and they were both girls, right? So one's kind of a story about party, one's sort of a story about gender. What do Republican boys and Democratic girls have in common? What is it that would make these 2 groups kind of respond to the exposure to women politicians in this way? So, this is the sort of thing you do the survey and you're scratching your head like, ooh, I wish I'd asked 20 more questions. I don't really know what's happening here. We did ask a question that we thought would be very helpful of our teenagers. We asked them about what political scientists call political efficacy. And these are questions like, do you think that people like you can make a difference in politics? Do you think that you have the capacity to influence outcomes in the political world? Right? It's basically a sense of political confidence is how to think about it, that you think I can do things. And so we looked at this question, how likely are you to say, yes, I am confident that I could be effective in politics? And we looked at Republican boys here and Democratic girls. I can make a difference, I just said that. And what we see is this big positive increase for Democratic girls. So what seems to be happening for Democratic girls is they see women politicians, and it, just as we've been discussing, it makes them feel more like they can make a difference, right? But we don't see anything like that for Democratic boys, right? Excuse me. There's just so many categories here. Republican boys, right? So what we conclude is that the impact that we saw on wanting to run for office or voting is a different sort of process. There's a different mechanism for Democratic girls versus Republican boys. So for Democratic girls, it looks like inspiration. They come to believe that they can do politics. Boys, however, are not inspired. They don't change that. And so we wonder maybe if what's going on here is more of a sense of threat. That as you see more women running for office, you think, ooh, this is not good. This is taking power away from the people who are supposed to have power, the people like me, however you want to think about that. And maybe I need to get into the arena as well. I don't have those results here. We did another study that focused on large groups of different racial and ethnic groups, white, black, Latina, and Hispanic, and Asian students. And we found something very similar. Lots of young people were inspired by women of color politicians, but boys of color become less interested in politics and sort of draw away from it when they see these women running for office. So I want to have lots of time for our students and questions. So I want to show you one more thing. So one of the questions we've gotten while we've been working on this is, well, that's really very nice. That in a survey over a 4-month period, you can change people's answers, that people become more positive about women as leaders or more likely to say they'll turn out in elections. But what really matters, if role models really are going to make a difference, it has to change their behavior when they're adults, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's who actually gets to choose our political leaders. Now, this is a very hard question to ask, or I'm sorry, let me put it this way. This is a very hard question to answer, not to ask, in that we need to know where people lived when they were young. We need to know where they lived and whether or not as adolescents they were exposed to women politicians. And then we have to let them grow up, and we have to go find them again and see what their political behavior looks like. And so we were lucky enough to find this data set. It's actually something produced by the Department of Education. It's mostly to track sort of the long-term impacts of different aspects of schooling on adults as they move through their lives. This data set is so private that we had to store it on a computer not attached to the internet, get special permission from the Department of Ed. They literally would fly people out to check on it, make sure we weren't using it unfairly. Mostly because the question, the real purpose of this is to ask people about drug use, sex, all these other sorts of things, and what that happens to kids. And they didn't want us to know who was doing drugs in high school, I guess. So the advantage of this particular survey is that we have these people when they're 10th graders in 2002. And then 10 years later, in 2012, the education department interviewed these people again, and among other things, asked if they had voted in the most recent election. And here's what we find. If you are an adolescent girl, I'm switching mics again, follow me. All right, so in this bar for women, when you were an adolescent in 10th grade, no woman ran for governor in your state. No woman ran for House. No woman ran for Senate. If you're in this branch, when you were an adolescent, at least one woman ran for House, Senate, or governor in your state. Now you'll notice that before I was like, what if there's 2? What if there's 3? Let me tell you, things have changed dramatically. In 2002, there's virtually nowhere where you're going to be exposed to one woman politician at a time. As you all know, because you just lived through 2 women gubernatorial candidates, right? That happens more now. It was not happening 25 years ago. And so we can compare what happens when they grow up. So this was a 10th grader. She saw no women candidates. And there's the likelihood that she's going to turn out in the most recent presidential election. These women, on the other hand, when they were in high school, were exposed to women politicians. And they are, in fact, more likely to turn out as adults. When they had grown up, got through college, or whatever they're doing, they are more likely to turn out in elections. And so we take this as evidence of persistence, this idea that it really does matter what happens to you. If your kids, what they live through as children is going to make a big difference. Now you'll see there's a positive effect for men too, although it's not statistically significant. There may be something about the places where women run, where there's particularly high levels of engagement. But we have every reason to believe that this is causal, that being exposed to women candidates when you're growing up is going to make a difference. I'm going to go this really quickly, and let me just say this. We dug a little bit deeper, and we asked, well, what girls become more inspired? And so what we were able to do is ask these kids when they were in 10th grade, remember this is 2002, and one of the questions was, do you and your family talk about politics? And some students said never. And some students said some of the time, and some students said a lot of the time. That was me and the household I grew up. It's not an accident that I'm a political scientist, right? It turns out that among those who said we often talk about politics with our family, whether or not you saw no candidate or one candidate didn't really matter. Do I have green here? How about I have an arrow? Yep. However, if you grew up in a household where they never talked about politics, those are the girls for whom being exposed to a woman role model mattered. We often refer to these in the social sciences as compensation effects. The number one predictor of whether or not you're going to be politically engaged when you're growing up is if you grow up in a politically engaged family. You're just learning that this is normal behavior that people take upon. And so for those girls who grew up in those sorts of families, doesn't really matter if you see a woman or not, you've already gotten all of the kind of impetus that you're going to need. But for those girls who grew up in families that really weren't preparing them to be politically engaged, they're the ones who, if they live somewhere with a woman candidate, that sort of pushed them to the next level. Let's skip this because I said all this as well. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I look forward to your questions.
Okay. Hang with us as we make a little transition here. A lot of compelling research there. I should give a quick plug. CJ Run and Dr. Wolbrecht will be out in the hall. She has these books available for sale if you would like to dive in and learn more. So be sure to keep that in mind for after we finish our program. Well, I'm delighted to be able to sit here with not only Christina, but also with Asia Colton and Braylon Price, two of our Cook Leadership Academy fellows. They were kind enough to join us for this experience so that we can not only hear about the data, but see if it bears out with a couple of our very own. So really excited for this conversation. Asia and Braylon, if you can maybe just level set with us, help us get a little context for you, maybe tell us where you're from, how you got to GV, and maybe also tell us the earliest politician you remember hearing about. And Asia, we'll have you start.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Asia Colton. I'm a senior here at Grand Valley studying Allied Health Sciences and Public Health. My hometown is actually here in Grand Rapids, and the first politician that I remember hearing about was Obama when I was younger.
Braylon, how about you?
Hello, my name is Braylon Price. I'm a junior at Grand Valley. I chose Grand Valley just because of the community, that's what I strive for. The first politician I also remember hearing about is Obama.
Braylon, remind us where you're from. Are you from here?
Lansing.
Lansing, okay, awesome. Oh, that's great. I forgot about that. So glad you chose us and not a different school.
Yes,
That's
me
excellent.
too. Me too.
Not that we compete or anything.
Oh.
Okay, so you've both just heard Christina present research showing that seeing women in political leadership shapes how young people think about politics. What part of that argument resonated with you the most or surprised you? And again, we'll have Asia start.
I feel like for me, the thing that kind of resonated with me first and just kind of hearing the presentation overall was just hearing how when boys and girls are young, how when they think of political leaders, the boys will draw men who they think are political leaders, and then the girls will draw girls, and then how that kind of changes as they age over time. I kind of was thinking about even like the doll test that they did kind of a while ago, thinking about like, you know, which doll would you consider pretty when they show a black doll and they show a white doll? And a lot of times, because of just the world and the perceptions and kind of what the media and what people were seeing, even black girls would pick the white doll instead of picking the black doll. So I feel like it just shows how much you see can really perceive what you feel you're able to do, and also what you think other people who look like you are able to do as well.
I would like to agree. I think what truly resonated with me was like obviously the fact that representation matters, but I really liked how you talked about there was more room to move for Republican women. I feel like this really emphasized the fact that education does matter, because I feel like the more you surround yourself in a community that isn't yours, you can become more empathetic and learn more. So.
Before today, had you ever thought about how political role models shape people's ambitions or expectations about leadership?
Would you like me to go first again? Okay. I feel like sometimes when we look at political role models, we kind of see them as people of power, and a lot of times I think we kind of look at them as a guiding light in a lot of sense. Sometimes they're kind of like what we expect the future will be. Maybe they align with the morals that you have. Maybe it's more of a sense of hope type of thing. So I think sometimes it's just you look at them as a sense of what can we do, what should we do, how can we do it. So I think they can really push forward what we think is possible in this country overall.
I agree. I really just love to hit home on the representation part. I think, I mean, for me, I always knew that it was important, right, that women are in office, but I never really allowed myself to, and just being honest, I never allowed myself to, like, put myself in your guys' shoes, right, and really just, I mean, because for me, obviously, like, I am a part of a marginalized community, and women are a marginalized community, so I think that, you know, I only put myself in, like, other people's shoes besides women, right, so.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Asia, Christina's research suggests that seeing women in leadership can influence how young women imagine their own possibilities. Has that idea shown up in your own experience?
Yes, for sure. I definitely think being a young woman of color in a lot of the spaces I was in, I was the only black girl in a lot of spaces. Sometimes it feels like, can I be here? Should I be here? Do I even deserve to be here sometimes? So I feel like having that representation, having people there makes you show, oh, this is possible for me. I can do this. Or maybe I'm the first and it's showing people who are younger, oh, you know, we can achieve this, we can do this, and we're just as qualified as anyone else. So I definitely think it resonates a lot with today, and even the lack of diversity we still see in politics as well.
Is that an awareness that you carry with you all the time? And I'll preface it with a story. I was recently at a very large business lunch, and there were maybe like 500 people in the room. And a woman came up to me who was also Asian. Now, I'm Korean, and I'm an adoptee, and I grew up in West Michigan. So I very much grew up in sort of, I don't know, a white assimilated culture, right? And this woman came up to me and said, hi, there's only a couple Asians in the room. I just wanted to come say hello. Now, I don't normally identify that way. Like, I don't walk around thinking I'm walking around in an Asian shell, right? And so it really took me by surprise, but I had to remember that just because I'm not thinking that way all the time, other people might see me that way. So I'm curious if that ever happens to you, or if your awareness about your identity is just with you all the time.
I think when I was younger, it was a little bit less. I didn't really think about it as much. I just thought, I'm here, she's here, we all kind of deserve to be here. But I think as I got older and I kind of learned the differences, understood a little bit more about my race, I kind of go in the room thinking, okay, how do I present in this room? Are there anyone, if there's someone who looks like me, maybe I should go up to them and make sure they feel comfortable in the room and they can make me feel comfortable and welcomed as well. So I feel like as you get older and you understand more about the history of society, more about yourself, it kind of makes you think, okay, I do realize this, I do understand I'm a minority in this space, and how do I navigate that?
Which is something we heard from Jenna as well tonight, so yeah. Braylon, Christina also argues that representation doesn't only affect women, it can shape how everyone thinks about leadership. Do you think seeing women leaders has changed expectations among men in your generation? A lot of talk about young men these days.
Yeah, I think if it hasn't, it should. Because, I mean, quite honestly, we obviously know that men, we have the top seat, right? So, and I mean, to put it bluntly, like, men, like, just stand up for women because, I mean, you should use your power to stand up for those who do not have the power, right? And so if we want to see progressive change, however you see that, then you got to use your voice and stand up for those who don't have one.
For both of you, either of you can jump in here. Among your friends and classmates, do you see any interest in running for office or working in politics? And what encourages or discourages that interest?
I can go first. I would say for me, I'm allied health sciences and I'm public health, so I wouldn't say specifically at this moment I'm interested in running for office. I don't close any options though, future can change and your perception can definitely change, but I feel like from a lot of my classmates and my friends, the reason that they're not really interested is just when we consider the state of the world right now, when we look at the wars, when we look at the cutbacks of DEI, when we look at the cutbacks of women's health, I feel like a lot of times those are the people that we need in these positions, but we're not really showing up and giving them the resources or supporting them. So why would they kind of want to be in those leadership positions? So I feel like that's kind of the disconnect of, I don't really want to do this when I don't feel like I'm even being supported by these people who are already in power right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Braylon, what about you?
I have always toggled back and forth between whether I would want to or not, and I think that's why I went the public and nonprofit route. So while still keeping political science in the back of my pocket. And for those around me, I don't really know if I see them, talking about running for office, but honestly, I wonder if there is more of an idea around, not really keeping it in politics, if it's doing something else outside of politics in order to create that change, because they aren't seeing it done in the way that it's supposed to be happening.
So I'm curious, with your local government focus, would you be interested in being like a city manager or working at the local level as opposed to, being a council person or something like that?
I've thought like a lot about that because quite honestly, I think local politics and local government sometimes matters more because you really hit home and what matters to the people that you're surrounded by. So I'm still debating. Yeah.
That's great. We won't hold you to it.
Yeah.
If either of you want to announce a bid for like 2032, that's great.
Speaking of,
Christina, what else have you heard from young people about their willingness to consider running for office? And we talked about this a little bit at lunch too. And not even from young people, from people in general about running for office these days.
Well, in addition to teaching young people, I have a couple of young people living in my house, et cetera, and I really resonated with what both of you had to say, right? And so one is, man, if you're inspired and you really want to solve problems, it's hard to look out right now and think, government, that's where I'm going to go. If I go to Congress, we're going to fix everything, right? You might be thinking, maybe I could work for a nonprofit. Maybe I could build a business that is consistent with whatever ethics or goals I might have. Maybe I'm going to work in communications and affect kind of dialogue in our country, right? And young people are wrong. There are a lot of important ways to shape the world, but we're not really making politics look like the most fun right now, right? And so I think that's very true. I think, and so I think I covered both of those. We also know there's a lot of online harassment, there's other sorts of issues, and that some of these things may be more discouraging to men rather than they are to women, right? You don't want to run for office now. People are looking into your finances, they're checking your old Facebook posts, they're all these sorts of things. That really feels intrusive, right? I just want to help make a difference on this or that issue. And so To an extent, I think, to solve the ambition problem, we have to sort of solve the political problem itself, right? It's sort of a chicken and the egg. We want different people in there, but a lot of those people we might want, those ethical, care about issues, want to make a difference people, are thinking, yeah, maybe there's something else I could do. And they're not wrong. Running a nonprofit is a great way to shape the world. Being a tech billionaire seems to be very effective, right? So if any of you were going to go into that, that'd be good too.
For you both, maybe to piggyback off that, and maybe it's a yes and, but if something could change about the current political system that would make you more apt to run for government, what would it be? Like, is there anything, if you're like, oh man, if this was different, then I'd totally be in?
If there wasn't so much hate, I think, honestly, I see it in our country the most. If there wasn't so much hate like pushed on each other, and I think if you really try to like hone in and remember like why you're doing what you're doing, I think if everyone kind of changed their mindset and really cared about learning about one another, that would encourage me to do that.
I feel like for me, sometimes you don't always want to have to be the first person to break through the door, the first person to be a woman of color as a president. You don't always want to have to be the first with all the other challenges that life brings. So I feel like it would be easier for me to see myself in that role. Again, if I was a different major as well, to see myself there if more people were already there. If I didn't feel like I had to break through all these walls to get there, if that makes sense.
For sure. Absolutely.
One I will say is my younger daughter, who, by the way, her name is Jane. So now I have to find up an idea for another book title that involves my other daughter's name, which is Ella. So if you have any suggestions, I'm happy to hear them. Jane was probably 9 years old when Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, and she said to me, and if you knew Jane, this would not surprise you, but Mom, if she wins, I can't be the first woman president. Like, that had been my plan, right? But I think you're exactly right, that being the first is scary. I literally on the break was reading another paper, other people's research about, but that is between lunch and today, which is about ambition. And instead of asking people, would you ever run? I thought this was really clever. She asked people, how much money would it take? At what point would it be worth it to you to run? And there's the sort of question of, yes, I could do this and not give up whatever other occupation or, supporting my family. But for me, and Megan and I were talking about this, I would say I need donors, not even for me. I need $100 million. I need to not have to spend all day, every day when I'm not at a campaign event calling people and asking for money. And that way I'm not so worried that another candidate will come in who's funded by some big company or some organization or whatever it is. And no matter what I do, I'm never going to be able to buy as many ads or have as many events or flyers or whatever it sort of takes. And so again, I think it's just a really tough time to consider pursuing office. It's so expensive. There's lots of people dabbling and putting money into politics. And so if anyone wants to give me $100 million, I would definitely run for Grand Rapids City Council. So you're welcome.
Well, you all know, I always like sort of a moral to this story. And I think this really needs to challenge all of us in what we expect from our elected leaders and how much we do or do not scrutinize them and the demands that we place on them. Because if we would want all these considerations to be made for ourselves if we ran, we also need to afford that to others. And so I really think about, we talk a lot about when we were hiring, we're always looking for unicorns, right? We want that magical person that can do every single little thing that we would ever want. And I know that I certainly want that in my elected officials these days. And so to think about, okay, what is reasonable, what is kind, what is manageable for the kinds of people that we want to have in office? So just two more quick questions. Asian Braylon, curious to know, when you're going to the polls and you're thinking about who you want to vote for, what kind of characteristics do you want in those people these days? Sorry, this wasn't on your list.
I think for me, I just look for someone who has the same morals as me, kind of has the same things that are really important and kind of hit home. I'm very big on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's pretty much in everything that I do, everything that I'm about. Even in public health, I kind of consider it, and also looking at people holistically and looking at social determinants of health. That's kind of all that we talk about all the time, and I love to talk about it. So I feel like if those morals can align with my morals, if most of their visions can align generally with my visions. Not that every single thing has to be exactly the way you want it, because you're never going to agree with someone on every exact point, but that we're really looking towards community, that we're really looking towards joining together, and really looking towards continuing to have a melting pot that supports all the people who are here.
I would say somebody that honestly kind of challenges me a little bit in my beliefs, because I feel like somebody that does that has the courage to, like, challenge everyone else and encourage everyone to, get out there and learn about like a community that you're not a part of. There's my first one, and obviously it's hard to right now, but somebody that I can tell they're a genuine person, and isn't in it and just saying things that they're gonna do when they're get in office. And so there's a few that actually I see that right now, and I have hopes for, but we'll see.
Well, Christina, we're going to let you have the last word for this portion. If you were advising the next generation of leaders, like the students here tonight, what would you want them to take away from your research?
She didn't put this on my list either, I'm just gonna say. So I guess I'll go back to, again, some of what I said at lunch. And when you asked that question, I was thinking, like, what do I tell my own kids? So I have a high school senior and I have a college senior, right? Like, what do I sort of encourage them to do about the world? And I guess we've talked a lot about the barriers, and we've only talked about some of them, right? The way that societies coordinate their action to make a difference, to make people healthier, to do sort of et cetera, there are lots of things, but mostly we do that through politics. And so I can be very cynical, studying politics for a living. Who had that idea? But I still believe that government exists to protect rights and freedoms, and to provide stability so that people can live flourishing lives. I still believe that. And I still believe that getting involved in government is one of the things that you can do that best helps you transform your own community to be more safe, more stable, more opportunities for growth, et cetera. And so the most of the advice I give is start local. As someone said, there's so much that's happening in your own communities on health, on library bans, on development, on environment, all those sorts of questions, and it's all much more accessible. You probably don't need $100 million to run for city council, right? And so finding those opportunities, encouraging other people to do the same. So maybe you don't run, but maybe you have a friend who would be great, and you're willing to knock on some doors and donate some money and talk to your friends, right? And so, it's only as good as the people involved in it. And so, we have to step up and do that.
Great, thank you. At this time, we are going to open it up for Q&A. So if there's anyone in the audience who has a question, we are happy to take it.
Okay, that's great. All right, I am the sole microphone lady today, so I'm going to get my steps in. Just give me some patience. I see one there and one there. We'll go back here, Gino, first to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for all of y'all's participation. That was really insightful. The research component has really got me thinking, and I guess I'm curious because I was talking about this with one of my peers as to how other places in the world don't seem to have an issue electing a woman as a prime minister or a president. So I'm wondering, I have my own ideas obviously, but I'm curious, what is happening here in the United States that's making it seem impossible to elect someone as president?
Look, I've been going around today asking people if Gretchen's going to run, so I don't know what you want from me, but I'm doing my best. No. There we go. Thanks. Okay, so some of you heard this at lunch today. The first thing I'm going to say is, what sort of lessons should we learn from the last 3 elections, right? We've had 3 elections. Donald Trump has consistently been the Republican nominee. 2 women ran against him, they lost. One man ran against them, he won. So, should we conclude that women cannot be successful running for president? I'm going to suggest to you that we probably should not conclude that. So, here's why. Which is not to sort of get in the way of all the different barriers, particularly for an executive office. We know in general, Americans in particular, but around the world, it's one thing for women to be one of 435 people in the United States Congress. You can kind of control women then, shh, right? But to actually be the sole leader, we definitely know there's more resistance to that. That's just a fact. So why do I not think that we should make that conclusion? Hillary Clinton, who I think it's fair to say is the most polarizing major woman in American politics in the late 20th, early 20th century, came within 80,000 votes in Pennsylvania, here in Michigan, and Wisconsin from winning the 2016 election. We have a very specific, she won 6 million more votes than he did. Most Americans actually wanted a woman to be president in 2016. I'm not saying Donald Trump didn't deserve to to win. We don't have majoritarian elections in the United States. That's not what our system works like. But the truth is, you didn't need to change a lot of votes in 3 states for them to flip, and we would be having a very different conversation about the public and what they're ready for, et cetera. In 2024, Kamala Harris became the candidate 2-3 months before the actual election, right? So she didn't have an entire year of primaries to sort of sell herself, people get to know her, be comfortable with her, et cetera. Obviously, she'd been vice president. I won't say some of the things that VPs have said about the value of that job, but they don't hold it that highly. In 2024, in democracies around the world, every incumbent party lost. You can look at this over time, and in some years, some incumbent parties win and some lose. Some incumbent win, lose. And then you get to 2024, all the incumbents lost. The best predictor of the outcome of an election is the GDP growth 2 months before an election happens. Now, there's complications in that now, but nonetheless, that remains true. People don't like inflation at all. It's not good. I don't like it. You don't like it. There was worldwide inflation in 2024. It was actually better in the United States than most other countries. We had a softer post-COVID landing than many other countries. And so what did people do when they were frustrated with the inflation? They punished incumbents. You look at all those incumbents who lost, Kamala Harris actually comes closer to winning than most of them did. In most other countries, there were huge sweeps in which incumbents lost office. Now, it doesn't matter that I just said, I don't think those elections were as much about gender as they were about other things, although they might have been. What matters is what people think that those elections were about, right? So I have a good friend who after every election travels all over the country. His research is talking to party activists on both sides of the aisle about what do you think happened in the last election? Why did your party win? Why did it lose? Who do you want to be the next nominee? And we definitely see narratives in media, among political elites, et cetera. And if they decide you need a big, strong, traditional white man like Joe Biden to be the candidate in order for us to win, then that's going to be what matters, right? It's fighting over that narrative, who is capable. I will tell you as an aside that there's very little evidence, contrary to what you've heard, that moderates actually do better as candidates than do more left-leaning or right-wing candidates for a whole bunch of reasons, which I'm happy to talk about. But there is that idea that we should, stick with the very normal and sort of whatever. And I think that's the lesson that people have learned from the last 3 elections. And that might mean that there's a male nominee in 2028.
If you could raise your hand if you have questions, I'm going to plan my route. All right, we've got one here.
So you talked about viable women candidates and them being novel. When does that door close for women behind those those trailblazers? When does that door open and when does it close?
So that's a great question. One of the things we write about in the book is the idea that the time for role models is waning, right? That in a sense, 44% of Democrats in the United States House are women, right? Not quite parity. There's actually kind of been it's been slowed. But we're sort of getting there, right? And so there's going to be fewer and fewer elections in which you say, wow, this is the first woman to be elected governor in our state. You guys don't get to do that anymore here in Michigan. We still get to do that in Indiana. You're welcome. Right? And so you're right. Eventually, and really it emphasizes that our argument depends on, or the reason we think role models matter is because women are exceptional. Right? And so theoretically, if women were 50% of all political leaders in the United States, little girls would grow up drawing girls as leaders, right? People would just come to believe that and understand that. That being said, I am not worried in my own lifetime of running out of novel women. Just for a whole bunch of reasons, I think we're far away. In fact, one of the more interesting developments of the last 20 years is it used to be that the percentage of women, for example, in state legislatures it varied, but not very dramatically from state to state. And what we've seen now, I was saying I had a dissertation student who's writing on exactly this, is we've now got states in the Southwest in particular, some in Massachusetts, where women are 40, 45%, even a majority of the state legislature. But there remain states in the United States where women are 11%, 14% of the state legislature. And so the many forms of polarization today, we have that as well, right? Some places, I can't turn around without seeing a Michigan woman holding some sort of political office, right? But if I was in a different state, I would be learning something very different.
Next question.
Hi. I was wondering, to what extent do you think tokenism has a presence here in American politics, and sort of how does the impact of substantive representation differ from the impact of descriptive representation?
All right, which class did you read your Hannah Pitkin in? So that is a great question. And I want to answer it like 20 different ways, but I'll try to keep it to 5. So the first is to say, what it means to be a woman and represent women is not one thing. It is empirical fact in the United States that the Democratic Party has many more women candidates and office holders than the Republican Party. That's been true since about the first year of the woman in 1992. That's changing, though. I really do think it's important that even on the Republican side, the last candidate standing in the presidential primaries in 2024 was a woman, right? That whatever you can say about Hillary and however you feel about her, we have seen many more very viable women candidates, especially on the Democratic side, but also on the Republican side since. I think, as I said at lunch, that if anybody who thinks, oh, if only women were in office, we would have no wars and there'd be no scandals and everything would be perfect. That is also not equality. That is women on the pedestal. And women, I think, in my own commitment to equality, can also be evil and warmongering and self-interested and all those other sorts of things. Like, I don't want women on the pedestal. I don't want us to assume that women are better necessarily. to me, it's more of a question of equitable. Who has access to power? Who has a voice to sort of speak? Trying to think if I want to say anything about that. I guess I'll say this one more thing, that if there's going to be more growth and more representation of women in politics, it really actually has to happen on the Republican side. That's where there's room to move, right? That's where you can make a difference. There are important organizations that are trying to do just that. Republican women face specific different barriers for the very same reasons these stereotypes I just talked about. Oh, women are they're more emotional, they can't be hard and tough, right? All these sorts of ideas. That tends to hurt women, politicians, in primaries. So if you ask, oh, can women win primaries? Women are advantaged in Democratic primaries, but they're disadvantaged in Republican primaries. And so, and to be honest with you, as the Republican Party nationally has moved to aligning itself with people who question whether or not the 19th Amendment should even still be around, right? That's going to make it harder for them to recruit women. But there are lots of women who share Republican values. There are lots of women that, views on fiscal responsibility and regulation and a pro-business environment who absolutely would be able to do those sorts of things. And so I think that's really, I think this is so far away from the question you asked, but that's really where I think a lot of the change has to happen.
So if I can jump in real quick, I'd be curious to know, Braylon and Asia, there are quite a few women in leadership at the cabinet level these days, right? Whether I heard someone whisper Kristi Noem, obviously she now has a different role, but Kristi Noem, Caroline Leavitt, others that you see and hear in the news, do you think of them the same way that you think of elected officials? So these are appointed officials. Do you think of them the same way that you think of elected officials? And does their leadership influence how you think about women in leadership at all? It's not a gotcha question. I'm just curious, because we do see women at very high levels of leadership within the administration right now.
I don't think it affects my views on women in leadership. I mean, this is how I look at things in general, as a person. So luckily, I don't think that it's affected my view of women in leadership.
I was going to say the same thing, but I think some of it is knowledge among people. I feel like a lot of people don't even know those women are in those positions, and they just kind of think, I think generally some people are just not as knowledgeable, and they think president, vice president, I think governor, they don't think any more than that. And sometimes I think they don't know how to learn that information, they don't know how to get that information. So I feel like some of it's just not having that knowledge and not having that awareness.
I would also say I think cabinets are especially powerful for coming up against very particular stereotypes. So I think Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, Hillary Clinton, all secretaries of state. We actually know, and this is true around the world, when it comes to cabinets, even places that have more women, those women tend to be the culture minister or the education minister or social welfare, those sorts of things. They're not the finance minister, they're not the state, defense, whatever it sort of is. And so part of I think why cabinet may be important in the long run for presidency is like, as you said, these people have a lot of power and make really important decisions at the executive level, and seeing women move into different sorts of those jobs, I think, could make a difference.
All right, coming to you in the back.
I'm curious if there's been any research on the effect of things like television shows and other things for making movement in this area. I know there's some research showing that things like Will and Grace had an impact on the acceptance of gay marriage. So I'm wondering about things like Madam Secretary, The Diplomat, and even Suffs as the mom of a theater kid.
I just finished The Diplomat. I'm just so tense. I do. So I don't know of a lot of studies. Those tends to be, even what we did, it's just difficult, right? In the sense that what we do is we say, a woman ran in your district, you might not know her name, you might not pay much attention to politics, but we're gonna look in general to see sort of what the effect is. And then I have people where no woman ran for president. It's a little harder to ask people about their television, watching, et cetera, especially because that's a choice, right? You don't choose to live somewhere, most people, for political reasons, but the kind of people that are gonna watch Madam Secretary or The Diplomat, right, might look a little bit different. All of that said, I don't think how can it not? How can it not, right? In the same example of Will and Grace and those sorts of things, where people go, oh, a woman in a suit jacket sat behind the podium and they played, the presidential march when they came in, and the world did not explode, right? It seemed to work out okay. I think it doesn't just have to be, literally playing presidents, but it's also women making, hard decisions on cop shows and, all these different places where we see women doing jobs, expressing emotions, demonstrating skills that we were less likely to see 30, 40, 50 years ago. Boy, I see that in my own kids. I don't know what other people's experience is, but my children were alive to the world when Pete Buttigieg got married in downtown South Bend. They were, alive for the world. I took them with me to the Democratic National Convention in 2016 when I went as a scholar to see the first woman get nominated. I know those things have changed their lives.
Okay, last question here, and then we'll pass it back up to you.
I don't think this is exactly in line with your research, but do you think that women in politics suffer more repercussions and are more often scapegoats than men in politics?
I don't just think it, I know it. Okay. So there are studies of exactly that, you got me on one I want to talk about. Cross-nationally in the United States, people have really looked at this quite closely, and there does seem to be pretty clear evidence that women are suffered more from scandals. Part of that is why I think that putting women up on this pedestal and assuming that they're pure and good is bad for women in the long run, because then you're really mad. Like, of course the guys are all cheating and doing whatever, right? But how could a woman do this, right? How could that sort of happen? Because I study suffrage, I have to make this longer sort of point. This has always been the argument about women getting involved in politics, that politics is dirty, that women need to stay pure in the home to protect the home as a place of respite for their husbands. And so one of my favorite anti-suffrage ads literally said, the home or the street. And it was like, if women can either be in the home, taking care of children, loving by the fire and the hearth and all that, or if women enter the public arena, they're literally streetwalkers. Like, that's really what the picture was. Where I saw this most vividly, I do again have to go back to 2016, right? To call Hillary Clinton a nasty woman, to say lock her up, right? Lots of people have been involved in the sort of things she was accused of, et cetera. But man, the sort of viciousness of wanting her to suffer for behaving in this way, to me, tells us that a lot of those ideas that were fueling opposition to women's suffrage 150 years ago haven't entirely left our politics.
Well, on that encouraging note, we are actually going to wrap up our event tonight. Would you all join me in thanking our panelists and Jenna? As I mentioned, Christina's going to be out in the X Hall with her book and her research. Be sure to stop by, check out a copy, talk to her a little bit before she heads back to South Bend tonight. As for Asia and Braylon and our other Cook Leadership Academies, we will be celebrating them. Their cohort finishes up, and we will be having a celebration here for them on April 30. You're certainly welcome to join us for that. We also have one more public program remaining this season, April 9, The Spy in the State, The History of American Intelligence, which is sure to be quite interesting. So thank you all again for being here. We're so grateful for your presence and your participation. Enjoy some dessert and conversation, and we'll see you again soon.